Perfect.
Cool. So it's good to see you guys. Luis mentioned that you guys want to hear a little bit about background about me. Um, so I started. So we have. I came into game development right out of high school. I started in test at Sega, and basically tested Sega games for the Genesis and Saturn, and for about a year. And then I went to Sony as a tester, testing games for the PlayStation 1. Um, and then when um, I did that for about a couple years, and I was doing this as like a temporary employee, so it was like on contract. And then Sony was looking for permanent testers, and so I applied and I got the job, and so I was the lead tester for about a year at Sony, and then I wanted to do something more, either in design or production, to be a producer or assistant producer or something like that. And Sony didn't have any positions available at that time, so I went to a company called 3DO, and they were hiring entry level layout designers, and so that was my first stint as a level designer. And I worked there for about a year, and then they had a series of layoffs, and after they laid me off, a guy that I had worked with at 3DO, he went to Sony in Santa Monica and suggested that I interview down there as a junior designer. And so I interviewed at Sony in Santa Monica as a junior designer, and went to go work on a game called Psycho 5.0, which was kind of like a Grand Theft Auto clone before Grand Theft Auto, and then Grand Theft Auto came out, and our game got canceled. And then we went to go work on a game also at Sony in Santa Monica. We initially called it Greek Mythology, and then later it was changed to God of War. And so I spent about a year on God of War at the very beginning. And then I was kind of homesick. I didn't really like living down in LA. It was just really hard to meet people, and I was just at work all the time. Not because I was crunching, just because I didn't really have anywhere else to go. Um, and so I left Sony in Santa Monica to go do Electronic Arts back up in the Bay Area where my family lived and family and friends lived. And in at EA, I worked on Lord of the Rings: Return of the King for the PS2 and Xbox. And then I was there for about a year, and I left EA to go work at a company called Pirate Games, like our Pirate, and that was a startup company that was started up by some guys that I worked with at 3DO, different guys, and worked there for, I don't know, maybe 7 or 8 months until their publisher went out of business and they couldn't pay me anymore. And I decided that I was going to go. I was going to go back to like a bigger studio, and so I went to Crystal Dynamics. And at Crystal Dynamics, I worked on a PS2 game called Project Snowblind. That's what I was initially hired for, and I was responsible for designing and scripting the last 3 levels of the game. It's a great game. Didn't sell well because it wasn't marketed very well. And then after Project Snowblind, I worked on a game called 25 to Life. It's a horrible, horrible game with an awesome soundtrack. Um, and I was responsible for fixing several of the levels that they originally designed, that were already designed, but they just were badly implemented. And then I worked on a game called Downfall. It was a post-apocalyptic survival horror game set in downtown San Francisco, and I left at that point because I wanted to go work with some friends of mine up in San Francisco, because I was working down on the peninsula a little bit in the Bay Area. It's close to San Francisco, but about 30 minutes away. Um, and so Downfall ultimately got canceled, so it was a good move that I left Crystal Dynamics. And then at when I went to go work with my friends up in the city, it was a studio called Shaba Games, and they were a subsidiary of Activision. And at Shaba, I worked on Shrek the Third for a little while, and then after that went out we worked on a few prototypes that didn't really ever see the light of day, and then I was responsible, one of the senior mission game designers on Spider-Man: Web of Shadows for the 360 and PS3, and I was basically responsible for designing a lot of the missions in the first third of the game and a few of the missions in the last third of the game, and then I passed them off to other various designers. While I was working at Shaba, I started teaching part-time at the Academy of Art University, and Shaba was closed in 2009, and in 2010 I went to go work at a studio called Page 44, and at Page 44 I was basically the project lead on Pictionary for the Wii using the UDraw game tablet that was being made by THQ. So we were working with THQ and Mattel to create that, because Mattel owns the license, they're the license holder for Pictionary. While I was working at Page 44, the Academy of Art University wanted to hire me to teach again, just as part-time like I was doing before, and I said there's no way I can do it part-time. If you want me, it needs to be full-time. And so they made me a full-time faculty. It took them about 6 months. So in spring, like January of 2011, they made me an offer for a full-time position at the Academy of Art University, and I took it. And from 2011 to August, like spring 2011 to August of last year, I was the design lead. So I was in charge of all of the design curriculum and all of the design classes on site at the Academy of Art University. And then last year, my family and I decided to move up to the mountains. We have a phrase here, hell or high water. We were moving up to the mountains, and so I basically told my boss that, and he's like, well, we want to keep you, so let's try to figure out something online. So I've for the last year, I've been the online director for the School of Game Design at the Academy of Art University. So I'm in charge of building all of our online classes. I'm still a game designer at heart, so I prefer Unreal, so I use Unreal on a regular basis. And you can actually see in the group chat that top video there. That's something that I've been doing with Unreal. So if you want to see any of my recent work, that's where you can see it. It's really prototype look. It doesn't look, it's not pretty. It just I think it plays kind of well. And so that's a little bit about me. And then I kind of wanted to go into Luis sent a couple topics to discuss, kind of going into it, and then we'll go into some Q&A. So I have a little outline here that I'm going to read off of. So the first thing is social game design, and kind of like what that means. And it basically means that you're incorporating and then reinforcing social interaction between multiple players. And some platforms have tried to invent their own kind of social network, but I would say that we can assume the social network that games should use should be Facebook, because I forget how many people are on there, but it's like 1 billion people, and that's like 1/7 of the entire global population that's on Facebook. So it's probably good to use that social network because it's the biggest one out there, and everyone's familiar with it. One way to reinforce that social interaction, and it really depends on how you're executing it or how your game works. But I think at a bare minimum, you should have some sort of ability for players to send items or gifts to each other, and these are things that will these gifts can be, it's not something that you should rely on for gameplay, or that the players should rely on for gameplay, but it's nice to have. And when you get this gift, it's going to enhance your playing experience. Maybe it's going to accelerate it a little bit, so instead of like waiting for something for a while, you can instantly get to your little micro goal. It also creates an opportunity for monetization, as if you're getting these kind of periodic gifts from other players and using them, you know what this gift or item does inside your game. And in addition to getting them as gifts, if you want to buy like a little 5-pack of them, then you can do that. So it's a way to kind of both reinforce the social interaction as well as microtransactions and monetization. Another thing that's really important for social interaction is being able to see how your friends are doing. If I'm adding my Facebook friends to this game to play this game, I want to be able to see their progress, and I want to be able to see what they're doing and how they're doing it. If it gives us an opportunity to kind of build something together, but it also gives me an opportunity to see how they've laid things out to get a sense of their strategy. I might think my friend has this really cool building in his town, and I want that cool building too. Or oh, that's what level 4 of this turret or whatever does. I can't wait till I get there. It reinforces the my excitement with the game, which also feeds into engagement, which we'll talk about in a minute. And also, like, they might be doing something that you're not doing, and it might make you think, like, they might have designed their base a certain way, and it makes you think, like, well, why'd they make their base like that? And you might reach out to them on Facebook or through the game and say, like, hey, why'd you build your base like that? Another thing that will kind of enforce and reinforce the social interaction is the ability to affect how your players are doing. For instance, most games, whether they're directly single player or kind of like have a multiplayer aspect to them, the successful games have an ability to be able to do something to your friends' area, your friend's base to help them. And one of those things is you could be donating troops to your players' military causes. Like, for instance, in Clash of Clans, or now Star Wars Commander, you can, which is pretty much just a Clash of Clans clone, you can donate troops, which there's troops that I can build, but when my friend donates troops, I'm stronger, and if I donate troops to my friends, then maybe they'll donate some to me, and then that helps reinforce the interaction because it has a direct gameplay effect. Another thing in single-player games is like watering plants. If I water someone's plants, it'll produce more, and that gives them more resources. So it's something that, and I do that to them because I want them to do that to me. And then, of course, like what I mentioned before about giving gifts, you might have, if I give gifts to my friends, then I kind of want them to give gifts back to me. And this kind of reinforces that kind of back and forth and ebb and flow of the social interaction. And then, I mean, that's kind of like a cooperative thing. And then there's also like a competitive thing. Maybe I can attack them and take their stuff. For years, I've been playing Farmville, and I've wanted to go to my friends' farms and raid it and burn their little village to the ground and take all their supplies and stuff. And I haven't really seen a game that has that kind of like asynchronous behavior to it, where you can choose to help or hurt your Facebook friends and create kind of interesting, compelling competition that way. Another thing is to reinforce it is kind of thinking about single player versus multiplayer. It's much easier to reinforce social interaction in a multiplayer game, and when I say multiplayer, I'm talking about an asynchronous multiplayer game, much like Clash of Clans or Boom Beach or Star Wars Commander or whatever, because the multiplayer connotation, there's multiple people there. It's already social. Like, you look at a PC game like Team Fortress 2 or Call of Duty multiplayer, that's as social of a game as anything, right? Because I'm playing in there with other people, and we're depending on each other for this like larger goal. And so it's much easier to reinforce that social interaction in a multiplayer type game. And it also gives the player a sense, when they're in a multiplayer game, not like a real time, but like in an asynchronous multiplayer game, they feel that these are their friends, their real life friends, and they're playing a game with them. So just by that very nature, it makes them feel a lot more compelled to play because you're not just playing with a group of faceless individuals. You're playing with people who are your real friends in real life, and that kind of reinforces. This all kind of speaks to engagement as well. Um, but also longer play times. And of course, with these free-to-play games, when you have longer play times or people who are engaged with the game for a longer period of time, it creates more opportunity for monetization. Um, if you do go with a single-player game, you need to make it feel like a multiplayer game. So an example of that would be Farmville, Farmville 2 Country Escape. It feels more like a multiplayer game than any Farmville game up to that point, because there's just so much direct social interaction. I log in and I see all these like little marks on my map about which friends have come and fertilized which plants and which friends have sent me gifts and that kind of thing. And so of course they're going out of their way to support me, so I'm going to go back. I'm going to go out of my way to give that back to them. Um, and then you get bonuses and experience for it too. So it feels like a multiplayer game, even though we're not battling and we're not like trying to conquer the world or something like that. We're just supporting each other. So again, the takeaway there is multiplayer. It's really easy, and if you make a single-player game and you want to reinforce social game design, then you need to make it feel as much like a multiplayer game as possible. That said, if social game design is kind of a pillar in a game's development, you kind of need to think about that part first. Like, how is this game going to be before you come up with any mechanics or how the game is going to be played? You kind of need to think about how how the social interaction is going to work. How are players going to help each other? How are players going to compete against each other? And then that kind of feeds into what style of game you're going to build. So all of these things together create a compulsion for the player to keep playing the game. The more the player plays the game, the more opportunity there is for them to make purchases. And then when they make purchases, they're now more invested in the game, and the more they're going to play it, which eventually creates even more opportunity for monetization. And that's kind of the feedback loop that you want. And social game design definitely helps you get there. When talking about player engagement, and that social interaction feeds into engagement as well. Your main goal is to keep players engaged, and this depends on like kind of what platform you have as well. For instance, your moment there, we kind of think about it in a few different terms here. There's micro engagement, and that's the engagement that that's like the kind of more moment-to-moment engagement that the player has, and then you can think about this as like maybe a battle, or harvesting, or running and jumping, or shooting something, or building something that I'm going to do that takes a minute or less. And this kind of micro engagement is at that time is probably more suited for phone interaction. So if you're shooting for a different platform like iPad, or maybe even for an iPad, you could expect longer than a minute for a micro engagement. Like basically your micro engagement is how long is this player going to sit down and play my game, and you need to plan for that. How is that fun? How do you create an experience that the player can have and feel satisfied in that short amount of time? And then, so you can expect a little bit longer amount of time for the iPad. And then, of course, for console development and PC development, you can expect even a longer amount of time. Like, for instance, for Team Fortress 2, my micro engagement is going to be, the time that I'm alive between my respawns. That might be like 5 minutes, or it might be like 30 seconds. It really depends. But because I'm sitting down and playing at a PC, you can expect a longer amount of time. So that's really the micro engagement, and how, and you need to make that fun. And that's something that you need to think about as kind of a pillar. The next The next level, and I kind of just came up with this on the fly because we have micro engagement, and of course we're probably going to have macro engagement, but what's in the middle? And so I just Googled it, and it came up. I came up with meso engagement, MESO, and so that's kind of like in between micro and macro. And I tend to think of meso engagement as stringing together of micro engagements. And one way you can think about that is like if you have a series of micro engagements, like maybe like 4 or 5 micro engagements, how are those kind of strung together to relate somehow to one another? Through these 5 micro engagement sessions, you might need to think about a common theme or a larger goal that players are working on. For instance, like in a single player mode, you might have a multiplayer game, but there might be like little single player quests that happen. And these quests might actually be a string of smaller micro engagements. So I'm excited about this quest because it has to do with like a jungle level, and I'm really into jungle levels or whatever. But in that jungle level, there's like all these various things that I need to do. And then through my, when I'm waiting for a bus or whatever, I can knock kind of one or more of those off as I go through. I don't necessarily need to do all those in the same amount of time. It could also be when in multiplayer where between battles you're doing battles to get resources to upgrade your buildings, and it's kind of like those upgrades that you're thinking about. I need to compete in 5 micro engagements to get battles or whatever to get this many resources so that I can upgrade this building so that I can do more stuff, kind of creating that like bigger loop. It also is thinking about small strategies. For instance, while I'm playing this micro engagement, I'm battling or whatever, I'm thinking about my next strategy. Oh, this strategy isn't working, so I'm going to try doing a different troop ratio or something like that, so that like my strategy is a little bit different. But it's kind of like a micro strategy. I'm not thinking like long term here. I'm just thinking about my next battle or maybe my next series of battles. Like, hey, I'm going to try this new troop and see how they work over a couple battles and make a decision if I want to stick with them. And this is kind of things like you're thinking about, like, hey, my crops are going to be ready in an hour, my troops are going to be ready in an hour, or my energy has been recharged and I'm ready to play again. The next level after meso engagement would be macro engagement. And this is kind of like how the player interacts and engages with my game over a longer period of time. And you can kind of think of that as in a lot of different fashions. The nearest one would be day. Like how is the player interacting with my game each day? How many micro engagements are they having? How many meso engagements are they going to have? And you can generally think about like the day interaction on a macro level is kind of being blended with like the meso engagement level. So players are tending to think more about like their energy being recharged, their buildings becoming complete, gathering enough resources for an upgrade, kind of like slightly longer term strategies. And then they have like the next level would be week. Like how is the player engaging with my game over the course of a week? Well, they're spending more time doing all of those little things up to this. So, what are some big wins? And that could be like upgrading a town hall or completing like a portion of an event of some sort. On the month level, the way that players interacting with your game is they have a group of friends that are playing this game already, and that's kind of where social interaction feeds into this engagement. So since my friends are playing, I should be too, because I like playing with them and I like interacting with them, and that's kind of what's compelled me to keep playing beyond the days and beyond the weeks. as I build up and as I've been playing this game, it takes me a progressively longer amount of time to make the upgrades and to develop my troops, or to harvest my berries or whatever. The things that I do in the game get progressively and progressively longer, so that kind of adds into that month area of like kind of a macro engagement. And then beyond that, there's like the year. I mean, if you can keep a player playing your game for a year, you've done a wonderful job. Um, One thing that you can do to keep the player compelled is to have several unique events kind of take place over the course of that year. Um, Clash of Clans, they don't really have events, but what they do have is they kind of have like a little winter theme, and sometimes they give out free stuff or whatever. They give out like a little special item during that time, and that's kind of interesting. It changes things up, and compels players to keep moving forward. With Farmville 2 Country Escape, they actually have seasonal events where you have to do all these tasks and make all this stuff in this amount of time, and then you get gifts. They give you stuff in the game that would take progressively longer time to unlock, or you might even have to pay money for at some point. So it's going to compel players to play even more. In the case of Farmville, like one of them was like, oh, you get a dog. It's like, well, I want a dog, and you look at how much the dog costs, and it's like 900 keys or something, which is like $20. It's like, do I want to pay $20, or do I want to do all these things in the event and try to win that dog? And of course, players who want to play for free are going to do all those events, and they might even get really, really close, but don't quite get the dog, and at the very last minute, they're just like, screw it, I'm going to buy the dog, and they put down the money because they've made that investment, that time investment. And then also the game, over that year period, that game has done a good job of reinforcing the social interaction between the players, because the more you bring in that kind of group, that player group, the more they'll be compelled to keep playing, and then you can expect them that they play the game for longer. And then I think the pinnacle thing about player engagement is external engagement. While the player is not playing my game, they're thinking about it. And if you can do that, then you're always going to keep them coming back. I mean, this could be strategizing. They're thinking about ways that they can improve. Maybe you're on the bus and you're playing for a few minutes, and then you actually have to go into some sort of meeting or something, and you can't actually be playing the game in a meeting, but you're thinking about like, oh, I can't wait until there's a break in this meeting so I can go out and upgrade this thing or whatever. That's kind of like the external engagement that you're looking for. And it can relate to one or more level of engagement, by really focusing on each of those levels, the micro, the meso, and the macro engagement. Players could look forward to any one of those things. For instance, players could be looking forward to the next battle because it gives them resources, or they're looking forward to harvesting because they can build something after they harvest that thing, or they're looking forward to unlocking the next chapter, or world, or quest chain. Or they're looking forward to one of the next events, like they just finished like a 4-week event in one of the in the game, and now they know they have to wait another 4 weeks for another stint of event. So like right there, you have 3 months of time that the players in the game, they're looking forward to that next big thing. And ideally, it would be great if you could get them to look forward to all of those things, right? And the biggest thing that this that kind of like I guess wraps around all of this stuff is treating games as a service, rather than as so I came from console development, like I described to you earlier, and we would work on a game, we would finish it, and then it would be done, and we would start working on another game. Nowadays, they don't do that, with mobile development, especially. Even with console development, there's always downloadable content that comes next. And you really want to support your player group. The more you engage with the players, the more they're going to engage with your game. and it's important that you give them what they want. And I'm not saying that you need to make the game easier for them, or you need to just give them everything that they want. But for instance, like the instance of a dog, like they're giving me what I have to jump through some hoops to get that dog, but they're giving me what I want. So that's kind of that kind of sums up the talk about in player engagement and social game design. So if you guys have any questions about that or any questions about anything else, I'm happy to field those now.
Luis, sería para preguntarle cómo saber exactamente qué diseñarles o cómo darles lo que quiere el jugador. O sea, porque Charlie habla de darles lo que quieren, ¿cierto? Y como de consentirlos. Entonces, ¿cómo lograr eso en específico? ¿Qué tipo de estrategias o qué se puede hacer para eso?
Charlie, so he's saying that how do you know what the player wants so you can give them what they want? Does it make sense? So the last thing you were saying.
Yes. You gather data. So for instance, if you're getting to a point where they're getting maybe you want them, there's like some extra challenging thing that's happening in the game, and a lot of people, when they get to that point, they're just quitting. They don't want to overcome that challenge, or they don't want to pay the money to go over that challenge. Then that would be a signal to you to make that challenge easier, or to make it more accessible for players who want to play for free, or players who have paid up to this point, but then are like, I don't want to play anymore. So I mean that's what I would suggest. There's some games have forums, and that's a really great way to collect feedback from players as well. It's a good place to see complaints about various things. Of course, with forums, you kind of need like a critical mass of players playing, because if it's just like 5 people that are posting in there, then the information that they're giving you doesn't necessarily apply to everybody. So the more players that you can get that feedback from, the more data that you can gather from the game itself, and the more comments from players that you can gather, the more educated your adjustments will be. It's like in console development, if we when we do what's called focus testing, watch a bunch of people play our game. If everyone's dying for the first time on level 3, all the developers end up talking like, "Hey, everybody died on level 3. Can we do something is that okay, or should we?" And in some cases it might be like, "No, it's not okay. We want them." I think dying for the first time, maybe on level 5 or 6, is probably where the group, the bulk of people should probably be dying at least once on level 6. And so at that point we can take that data and say like, all right, we need to make level 3 easier, because we want to get people into our game. The more people play our game, the more invested they feel, and the more likely they're going to play it longer. The only reason I stopped playing free games, the free games that I've played, is because another free game pops up and it takes my time, and I just kind of forget about I haven't played Clash of Clans in months because I've been playing other games.
Listo. Okay, very good. And that thing is a very important aspect of the games. I think if we need a generate space.
Hey, Luis, are they cutting out for you?
Yeah, they got frozen. Yes, weird thing.
Okay. You can type his question. If he can hear me, I can answer.
Facebook.
Okay.
¿Qué tipo de estrategias o como de ese tipo de espacios son como los más convenientes o los que los jugadores o los usuarios tienen? Sería esa la pregunta para hacerla a Charlie. ¿qué tipo de espacios son como los más, aparte de Facebook, ¿no?
Okay. Oh, because he's asking is what kind of environments would be the best for to create a community besides Facebook? And I might add like maybe some strategies to build a community.
Yeah, I think tapping into Facebook first is probably the best thing, and the reason is because if I'm a gamer and I'm on Facebook, you can assume that I already have gamers as my friends, and so if I'm playing a really fun game, I'm probably going to loop them in on it and connect with them, and then I think from there, when you have like websites or something like that, that where you're trying to get this data from players, like player feedback, that's kind of where the opportunity is that you can kind of build your own community. For instance, and you can also do something in your game too, like you could post up like little like after someone has played. You know how sometimes you're playing a game, it says like rate me after you're played a little while. You might have something that pops up like that saying like, please consider giving us some feedback if there's things that you want to see that you want to make better, or complaints that you have, or any features that you're interested in, and then send them to your game's forums. And then that's kind of where that community starts building. But I think Facebook, it's already there, so you might as well leverage it, at least at the beginning. I mean, there's lots of people who make town or base layouts and that kind of thing for Clash of Clans, and they have a big following on their website. But like all of the people that are in my group are all my Facebook friends. And then their Facebook friends, and then their Facebook friends. So it's like I'm in a group with people that aren't necessarily my Facebook friends, but they're friends of friends. And so you have this like little kind of cluster of people who are all know someone in that group.
Ok. ¿Qué otra iba a preguntarte? No. ¿Ustedes tienen alguna pregunta? ¿No? Luis, de pronto sí sería como seguir analizando, que no sé si lo va a tratar, es qué elementos o qué tipo de cosas se deben tener en cuenta, aparte de las que ya he mencionado, para diseñar los niveles. ¿Ya? Por ejemplo, si yo tengo un Endless Runner y yo necesito, como qué tipo de cosas necesito tener en cuenta a la hora de diseñar esos niveles. Por ejemplo, Rayman, ¿no?
Okay.
El level design of Rayman tiene unas cosas especiales, ¿cierto? Está diseñado para generar eso. ¿Qué tipo? Esa sería la pregunta, pues no sé si lo va a seguir analizando. ¿Qué tipo de elementos se necesitan ahí, pues para?
Yeah, listo. So what he's saying is that it's more this question is more towards endless games. I think that was the other topic. But so he was saying what kind of elements. I don't know if you had something you were gonna say before this for endless games, but he was asking what kind of elements should you take in account when you are designing endless games, endless levels, because you might have levels and the game might be endless. So yeah, when you're designing levels and based on an endless game.
Can you hear us?
Yeah.
Hello.
Hello.
Hey, Andrés.
Hola,
Sí, voy a preguntarle que los elementos que necesitamos para
Okay, I think he can get the answer, the question better. Dale, Andrés.
Sí.
Wait a moment.
Luis, queríamos saber como qué tipo de elementos se tienen que tener en cuenta a la hora de diseñar los niveles.
Sí, yeah. Sí, no. So Charlie, no, yeah. The question that I made, that was it. Just elements.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
So is this specific to endless runners, or like, because I mean, any kind of like free game that you want it to be endless, but you're talking more about like endless, like an endless level.
I think there's more like endless in general, endless games in general. Like, well, you have to design the levels so the player can play in it. So it doesn't matter if it's like endless runner, 3D, side scroller. So that would be like the question would be more elements to design these kind of levels to be endless.
Right. Yeah. I mean, one way of doing it is to make it procedural. so that we just had somebody drop out, but hopefully they can hear. One way would be to make it procedural so that it kind of it's the code that keeps it repeating. Another way is to kind of build it as like a choreographed experience, and then at certain junctions, based on player choices. I think Drive Me Bananas is actually an interesting. There's a mechanic in there that would be really cool to incorporate in a game. So in Drive Me Bananas, you get down to the edge, you get down to the end of like a straightaway, and you have a choice of making a left or making a right. And when you make those choices, and maybe you do this, Luis, I don't know. I've played it, but I haven't picked up on it. When you make a right or a left, that actually takes you off to a different level, and they're kind of like put together. Stitched together. You have like little transition areas that stitch from one level to another, and then they go through that one for a while, and then eventually they come across another choice, and then they choose to go to a different level based on that. And maybe that choice is explicit and known, like, you know, if I launch off on this ramp, then I'm going to the space level, or if I go down, you know, this hole, now I'm going to the tunnel level, or the cave level, or something like that. And so as they play, they kind of get that idea of like that their choices in the game are dictating kind of what environment they go into.
But they're not. That's the funny thing. The whole game is procedural and is random. So that's very interesting, because even though you get a choice, the choice doesn't. It would not take you to a specific place, but the player thinks it is, which is very interesting.
Right. Well, what I'm saying is like you could do that. You could have distinct choices that actually have an effect in game.
Oh yeah.
And it might be like, and maybe there's things and bonuses, like maybe you try to get a bonus in one level that then you can apply to another level, do something in there, get a bonus there, and bring it kind of back into a different level, and you get some sort of reward for kind of like thinking outside the box in that sense. Or just picking like which level you're going, trying to get the highest score that you can. But even with endless runners, I think I think it's hard to keep people engaged for a long period of time, because it does focus way more on the micro engagement than either the meso or macro engagement.
Listo. Ahora sería de saber, es la misma situación, pero en el contexto de exploración. De juegos como Tinitive, ¿qué otro juego? A ver. Sí, o sea, el mismo caso, pero no, por ejemplo, en los juegos tipo Endless, sino, por ejemplo, en los de exploración o Adventure.
Okay. So what they're asking is, how do you do an endless game, but not on runners, but like an adventure or exploration type of game?
That's I need to think about that for a second. It would definitely need to be procedural, or have several like little things that all kind of lead back to each other. I think with procedural layout in like kind of like an exploration kind of thing, it's not timed. You can just go wherever you want and discover whatever you want. I think it's actually more kind of if you do it procedurally, it's going to be different every time. There's going to not really be any predictability, so you might end up losing the player in exploration. Like they might feel lost because nothing is looking the same and they can't ever get back to the exact spot of where they've been. So it might be something where kind of like a similar kind of thing is where you have like several hubs of explorative areas that are all kind of connected with little tunnels, and so you get kind of a sense of like this larger world, but there's always something in the game to be doing. For instance, World of Warcraft, I think, is a good example of that. Like the environment is static; it doesn't change. But there's all sorts of gameplay that takes place inside of that world, and they gate the player from going to certain areas by the difficulty of the challenges that are in those areas, which kind of keeps this kind of like sense of wonder and exploration alive. Like once you level up to a certain degree, now you can go into this area safely. And I think anyone who's played WoW has always run through, everyone's run through some area that's way too high level for them, just to see what it looks like, and just to not really explore, but just to make it, take a shortcut from one area to another or something like that. So I think that's a way that you could make like an explorative game endless, is like the actual game is and the things that the player has to do is taking place in this really large, expansive environment that's connected to a lot of other large, expansive environments by like little funnels of transportation or something like that, like little tunnels or conduits between those environments. Yeah, the gameplay could be whatever you want. I mean, it could be collecting stuff. It could be like with the delivering. Picking up lost mail and delivering packages and that kind of thing, and then you get each time you pick stuff up, it tells you kind of where you need to go. Maybe you're working in the same area for a while, and then you pick up some packages like, oh wait, you need to go to like Alpha Centauri or something to deliver that, and you're like, whoa, I've never been there before, and so you're going into this new area with this package, and that's kind of like a way to like lead the player around, is through those like little micro goals. So that the game has a lot of exploration in it, but the underlying goal is something different. Like in WoW, it's like quests. You're always doing quests, and eventually, when you do enough quests, you get a quest that takes you to a different area, and then you do quests there. But really, what's important about WoW is the social interaction. I like playing this game with my friends, and I get to see their avatar dressed up, and I can battle them if I want, or I can, they can help me out do stuff. It's that's where that kind of player engagement comes in, is through that multiplayer experience.
Okay, Charlie. About that, we have another question. Luis, sería la siguiente situación, o sea, ya identificamos que hay una estrategia, ¿cierto? Todo ronda una estrategia para generar, sobre todo, engagement, ¿cierto? Micro, meso, macro engagement, ¿cierto?
Sí.
Entonces ahora la pregunta sería si Charlie tiene un método o una técnica o una serie de procesos para poder diseñar ese tipo de cosas, para poderlas producir. Es decir, primero se hace esto, segundo se hace esto, tercero se hace esto. Si existe ese método, ¿por qué? Porque, por ejemplo, nosotros no lo conocemos. Ya, el conocimiento que tenemos acá en el equipo es un conocimiento empírico, ¿ya? O sea, porque aquí pues, no lo tenemos pues, a disposición. Toca lo que sabemos, lo hemos aprendido de gente como Charlie, como tú, o de internet, leyendo en foros, en libros. Pero entonces quisiéramos saber si él tiene como tal esa información.
Un método para generar, o sea, a ver si entiendo.
Para trabajarle la estrategia, o sea, un método que diga, casi paso a paso, por decir.
¿A qué parte de la estrategia? ¿Al engagement? ¿A cuál parte exactamente?
Para la parte que está vinculada entre el level design, o sea, entre diseñar los niveles, y la estrategia de engagement, de generar que el jugador siga jugando y no deje de jugar, sin importar el tiempo que pasa.
Okay, ya entiendo. Okay. Charlie, so what they were asking is, they're trying to get like a very methodical way. If you, sorry, if you know a step by step, like a recipe or formula to develop the levels, and at the same time build the engagement. So let's say, as an example, I would say, step one, I don't know, know your audience. Step two, know the layout, the flow of the game, and if the flow is fast, then use this strategy to engage the users. So that's kind of what they're seeking, like a very methodological steps by step between levels and engagement.
Okay. Well, like I mentioned with like the social interaction and player engagement, if you do want to have social interaction or like a social aspect to your game, that kind of needs to come paramount. So that would be the first step. Is like how are you going to make your game social? And then what's going to happen in the game that's going to reinforce that social behavior, and then that would influence like what kind of environment you're building. For instance, if you're going to actually be encountering people, or maybe you can leave gifts in an area or something like that. There's like anyway, just I would look at what social interaction you want to do in there, and then let that drive how like what mechanics you're going to have in your game and how that's going to play in the level, because that's really going to affect how big your environment is. If you're actually running into people inside this environment, maybe you don't want to make it that big. Maybe you want to make it smaller, so those opportunities for running into each other is more common. The next step is when you make that determination, I would build a quick prototype and then test out that social engagement and in that environment and in the levels, and see how it works. And if it feels good, then keep going with it, and then focus test it as well. And I mentioned this last time, where getting as much user feedback as possible is kind of like one of the most important things, because your players are going to be driving how this game evolves over time, based on their wants and their needs and that kind of thing. And then, and I mean, if we're looking at, I mean, we're still talking about like the attractors and repulsors and that kind of thing too, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So how does that affect? I mean, here's my take on your game right now. To me, your game seems like a one-off single-player game. That when I mentioned last week about like one of the things that you might want to do is just finish your game as a single-player experience, and sell it for 99 cents. Just make a lot of levels, and that's it. There's no social engagement or anything like that. It's just a game. If that's the way that you want to go, I think you're in the right spot for that. If you do want to bring in a lot of social interaction and player engagement, you want to have players playing this game for a long period of time, then you need to that completely changes everything. What are you guys thinking about right now?
Los gadgets y que un amigo te colabore por hacer los gadgets, ¿no? Es lo que hemos pensado.
Now we're thinking in the social elements in the game. They should be like sharing different elements and items for advance in the game. So another player will be he will be give you a special item for advance in your game. So we are thinking that making no social will not help us to our game. O sea, vamos a llorar para nuestro, porque aquí ¿cómo lo decimos? En la empresa, o sea, ¿cómo decir que la empresa nos está enfocando a lo social? O sea, necesariamente tiene que ser social porque hablamos con los de marketing. Y los de marketing hacen parte de lo social. Luis, ¿nos puedes ayudar con esto?
Dale, dime.
Nosotros acá, o sea, no podemos seguir lo que él dice, que es lo single player y hacerlo social. ¿Por qué? Porque en las mentorías que hablamos con los otros mentores, lo social es importante. Y acá los inversores y los directores nos pusieron como regla hacerlo social. Pero no social tanto como, digamos, como un Candy Crush, como una cantidad de gente al mismo tiempo, sino con el tipo de compartir elementos. O sea, te comparto un gadget, te regalo ciertos puntos, te regalo cierto dinero para que puedas adquirir los puntajes, ya que en nuestro juego, de alguna u otra manera, lo tenemos que hacer social. Eso es lo que queremos hacer.
Sí.
Okay. So what I'm trying to explain is that, so, well, they understand like how the game is right now, and they understand like the single player option. What they have a different, they have a, like their investors and their management like on top of them. They require that the game has social elements. So, but they know how far they can go. So they're thinking of not so aggressively social, but to say like
Okay.
mildly elements, social elements with a strong single player. But they need to have something social. That's something that they have to.
All right. So I think like sending gifts to each other, being able to like uh, and those gifts can be anything. They can be like little gadgets, things that you can find already in the game, but you can like give extra little bonuses to each other.
Yes.
Um, maybe there's like a home base that you keep coming back to that you're trying. Maybe you're trying to fix your ship or something like that, and or like and your ship is like this, kind of like a big thing, and your friends can go in there and help you fix up your ship, or just like add components to it, like hey, you have to wait this amount of time for your fuel to get more, or you have maybe when you're flying around with your jetpack you only have a certain amount of oxygen, and they can like uh, fill up your oxygen reserves on your ship faster or something like that, so you can play more. So I think there's ways that you can integrate that integrate that kind of social thing through like that gift exchange that I was talking about. Um, as far as like the levels go after that, I think uh, and if your true game experience is going to be single player, which it sounds like it is, then what I would do is aim for what's called an X level, and the X level is a level where that has kind of like a combination of all the gadgets and all of the environment obstacles all together as one, and you have some like really complex, crazy gameplay going on there, and like that's really like you want players to be able to get to that point. That X level, when people play that X level, it's going to be elegant. It's going to be smooth. It's going to be it's going to have layered complexity. I mean, I imagine you're kind of going for like maybe a mid-core audience. Is that true?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, you don't want to go too hardcore with it, right? You don't want it to be too difficult and too challenging. So I think as in the development of that X level with all of these gadgets, that's really where you should be focus testing. And in terms of like, is this fun? Is this too difficult? Is this just right? Does it make you want more? And then what you do at that point is you kind of work backwards and forwards from that. So, some of your teams working backwards to make it easier so that you can ramp up into that, and then some of your team is working forwards to make that even more difficult, not more difficult, but more have more challenges and that kind of thing moving forward from it. But when playing that level, it should be a complete level, so like all the UI done, characters, mechanics, everything. It should basically be an entire game that it looks like just a level of a finished game. And of course, you don't have the other levels, but I think the whole team kind of needs to work towards that, because that's going to get everybody on the same page as to what your game is. And then beyond that, I mean, while you're developing that, you're also developing the tools to make the rest of your game too. You have all of these mechanics that I've already done, and you can kind of just set the level designers or whoever's going to be designing like the gameplay part of the game. You can kind of just set them loose. And use the tools and mechanics that have already been created to finish out the rest of the levels. Especially, I mean, whether you're going for something that's like in this, I mean, that's just like a methodology that I would use in a like developing a 10-level console game, or like a 1,000-level Angry Birds game. It's finding like what that level that represents your game, and then building everything out from there.
Okay.
And maybe you have a series of X levels, right? Maybe you have a series of X levels for each main mechanic. Like maybe you have like 10 worlds or something with like 100 levels each, and that's how you hit your 1,000 levels. and so you have 10 levels, but they're representative of what that whole world is going to feel like. It has a different look, it has a slightly different play, and move out from there.
Okay, Charlie, that's very good information. I have another question. In the beginning of the meeting, you told us about some kind of game with a very bad level design. What kind of bad things have these games?
So it was a console game called 25 to Life, and the thing that was bad about it, it was actually being done by 3 different studios. One studio in Austin, Relic or Idle or something like that, was doing the environment. Avalanche, which is now owned by Disney in Salt Lake City, Utah, they were doing and this is right when they got bought by Disney too, so no one wanted to make a game about murder and stuff. They did all of the programming, and I think there were some IDOS producers that were doing the level design, and so it was because this studio is this effort was so split up. You had someone doing the layout in Austin, you had someone doing the programming in Salt Lake City, and you had a couple of producers with probably not a lot of design experience dictating what the gameplay was going to be like in those levels. And so there was no one person that was in charge of any one level. And so we were given the game because we had some designers that weren't working on anything at the time, like myself and a couple other designers, and they wanted us to give our feedback, which was good because it ultimately made the game better. But we had some things that we had to work within. For instance, we couldn't change any of the environment. In some cases, we could like make a door open, or we could move a fence, or we could make like really small changes, but we couldn't do huge changes because we couldn't remodel anything, right? We could move some individual elements around, like we could move a dumpster or a car and they just rebake the lighting and all that, but we couldn't do a lot of environment changes. So really, what we were down to was like all we could work with is programming, and the people who were implementing the characters and all that were programmers in Salt Lake City, and so every week we would get a build, evaluate it, write up a list of things that were wrong with the game, and things that we needed to be fixed. We would fly the camera over here, spawn this type of character here, give him this kind of weapon. He should follow these waypoints, and we would like give like the XYZ coordinates of all those waypoints around. He should stop here, take cover behind this object, and shoot at the player. So we were really specific about what should happen. So we ended up making the game better, but it was never the game that I would want it to be because we came on so late in the process, and you also had studios who were supposed to be working together on it, but weren't actually communicating that well. So it wasn't like any inherent methodology. I mean, it's common sense now that if you're going to work on something with somebody, then you need to communicate about it. Give one person ownership of something. You know, like if you can give a designer ownership over like 20 levels or 100 levels or 2 levels or whatever, then if that level sucks, you know who to come blame.
Charlie, how in this experience for this bad game, how many times you explain it? ¿Cómo se dice? Sí,
¿Cómo que se dice?
Invirtió.
How
many times?
How much time did he
Spend? ¿Cómo dices?
spent?
How many times of your time you spend designing or redesigning that level? I think that levels or that iteration.
So there wasn't a lot of time. So during that period of time, because it was a console game that had like maybe 10 or 11 levels, or maybe 12 or 13 or something like that. So, and there were like 5 designers working on it. So really for us, it was, we would play the game one day, and then we would write up a detailed list the next day or two of all the changes that needed to go in, and we send it back to them. It wasn't even a full week of work for all of us designers.
Okay.
And
So
they were actually trying
Sorry,
to keep us
sorry.
on. They were trying, like, Crystal Dynamics at that time was trying to keep us employed so that we could end up going on this other game that was ramping up. So it was just something to do in the meantime to give us some work. I mean, there wasn't much more. Like, for me, I'm a implementer. I like getting my hands in there and making the changes myself. But we didn't have the power to do that. We didn't have access to their code. We didn't have access to any kind of tools where we could affect the actual game. So in what I would be doing if it was my level is I would be sitting there making these changes and testing them out. I'd be able to iterate much faster on this game, like, you know, daily iterations, you know, hourly iterations. Where with 25 to Life, they were weekly iterations. So I think the faster you can iterate on stuff, the better off it'll be, because the more times it's been improved upon.
of course, it's like a map editor, or something like that.
Yeah, like a
Okay.
level editor. We didn't have a level editor or anything like that, so it was just like writing up feedback and sending it back to them and hoping that they understood it all.
Oh, okay. So in this moment, we don't have any level designer or ¿cómo dijo? Level tester, level any.
Yeah.
Nothing about that. We don't have that profile. I think we need it. So, what do you think about that profile? We have to maybe pay or find this person, or I don't know.
You might be able to find it on your team already. Like, maybe no one's assumed that role yet, but there might be someone on your team who is who plays lots of games and really and maybe has done some, like, you know, Quake edit, or, you know, Team Fortress 2 level editing, or Warcraft level editing or something like that. That's the person that you would want to leverage. They might be an artist, or they might be a concept artist or something, but they also have like this implementation side, some technical knowledge on that side, and they also might be a really prolific gamer. That's the kind of person that I would peg to take that role on, someone existing on your team. And then it doesn't cost you that much. You just end up splitting their time between that and what their other role. If you're going to find someone new, then you're going to be paying more money.
Yes.
But in any case, you need someone to assume that role, whether it's inside or whether it's outside.
Yes, and that is because this city, or maybe on this country, is very hard to get experience studies.
Yeah.
Studies for gaming, for level designers, for game designers.
In our country, this video game industry now is in the first steps. So we can find a specific people with that requirement. So in this, in our office, the players, we are together. We are the players, so we can do that work. We spend a lot of time in games, different types of games, like 3D, 2D, games. So we can do that work. We need some guides.
Information. Consejos. ¿Cómo se dicen consejos en inglés, Luis? Advice.
Right.
For Andres and me, German. We are very gamers. All of the game, all of the games that you you mention, ¿cómo se dice mencionar? You say,
Okay,
like Team Fortress,
Right.
all of the games.
Call of Duty.
We are very, very, very hungry for our games, and
Oh.
we still don't stay just like gamers. We evolve to make that games. So in that way to things to way of things, we want to make the games, but still we need help with the
for
basics, with with the knowledge to do that games, to design the levels, to design
Yeah.
the game, because we are very creative, yeah. But
we don't have
you all people need more information, more basics. I think.
Yeah. One thing you could do too, I mean, I imagine if there's probably a big gaming community in Colombia, right? Like a lot of people who actually play games and that kind of thing, right?
Yeah, right.
Yeah. So one thing you could do is you could, um, if there are any, because a lot of people create mods, at least here in the United States, people create mods and that kind of thing, is find, I mean, there might be like kids even in Colombia that are making mods for various games. There's got to be some people who are making mods for these games,
Okay.
or even like levels and that kind of thing. And I think trying to find a community website where people are posting up their levels for, maybe Team Fortress 2 or Call of Duty or any games that are really popular in your country, and
Okay.
and 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 if someone has like really well reviewed levels or levels that you play that are like, wow, that's awesome, then you can assume like, hey, this guy knows something about level design. He might not know any of the methodology or names of like techniques and that kind of thing, but he just has a
Okay.
good feel for it, and that's the kind of person that you want. I've known people who have started up companies. They hire like like an 18-year-old kid who he skateboards and surfs and makes levels in his spare time, and is dropped out of school, doesn't know what to do, and boom, he's a awesome level designer. So it's not, you don't necessarily need to find someone who's classically trained in level design or has a game design degree. It's just someone who has that passion and proven execution in it. So if you're looking on Team Fortress 2, I don't know if you have like specific servers in Colombia or like websites where people post up their levels and that kind of thing. But I would seek those out. If you don't want to find this person internally, and you want someone who has kind of like more of a just good feel of level design, that's where I would look.
Okay.
okay.
We have the two persons or the people inside of the work, inside the office, and we will go to use these persons to make the level design, for example.
Okay.
Um,
Do you have some books or reference we can read and look for making this work easier? Like a
Yeah.
book or a website where we can find some reference and a guidance for making
yeah.
this work.
Very good, very good. I think.
Yeah. Let me find one.
Okay.
Yeah, there's a couple that I think are good. They're more general like game design books, but they apply to level design as well.
Okay.
Let me say websites.
All right, I'll put it in the chat.
Okay.
Okay. Yo tengo otra pregunta, pero aquí sí me vas a tener que ayudar, Luis. ¿Cómo, él comentó más o menos cómo empezó, ¿cierto? Cómo arrancó todo, pero mi pregunta sería ¿cuál fue la primera etapa, con lo que inició él para hacer todo lo que hace ahora? O sea, para hacer el level design, hacer todo ese tipo de cosas. ¿Qué fue con qué empezó, mejor dicho? No sé si se entiende mi pregunta.
¿Cuál es la base para empezar con todo ese tema?
Él, en su experiencia personal, ¿con qué empezó?
¿Con qué empezó? O sea,
¿Con qué
¿cuál
empezó?
fue con el que empezó?
Si dibujaba, leyó,
Ok.
un amigo lo ayudó con la cosa.
Ok, listo. Yo creo que esto ya para cerrar. Okay, Charlie. So I think that's with
Yeah.
this question we can wrap it up.
Okay.
It would be so. How did you start? So the one is. I think the question is like, what was the constant? So like, did you start by designing, by drawing, by reading? How did you start? Like, what was the first thing you started doing to get into video games?
To get into video games, I started testing. So, I mean,
Yes.
as a kid, I played games, right? So, I think in seventh grade, I made a new Metroid game with this guy in my seventh grade class, and
Oh,
we did all the paper maps for it and everything like that. I mean, we never talked to Nintendo about it or anything because we were just kids, but it was kind of like there was that innate kind of like we want to take this thing that we already see and we want to do something else with it. We want to make it better, make it different, or add stuff to it. And so there was that kind of that feeling that I had like at a very young age. And then I got into the industry luckily by my cousin Kevin. I was moving up from Fresno. I don't know if you know where Fresno is. It's Central California.
yes.
Moving from Fresno to the Bay Area, and I had just missed the enrollment window for college. And my cousin said, "Well, if you're not going to be doing anything, why don't you just test video games?" Because he was working at Sega. And I said, "Well, that sounds like a great idea." So I interviewed with them, and they gave me the job. And so that's like what first got me into testing. And I think when I was testing, you get because you just sit there all day long playing video games, so you just get a good sense of like what things are working well and what things are not working well. And you get the more you do that, the more confidence you get about the changes that you feel are appropriate and that kind of thing.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's just that.
Yeah, I mean, one thing, if you guys want to like help yourselves think more like a designer, I think I would like make a level for Team Fortress 2, or make a level for, I don't know what the level editor's like for Call of Duty, but make a level for a game that has a level editor, and then post it up on community boards, because you already know what the game is, right? With Team Fortress 2, you already
Right.
know how it works. You're not trying to make new systems or anything. All you're doing is just making a level, and that at least gets you into design and gets you that experience of like creating flow and space, and you want to make sure that you're not you don't. One of the mistakes that I made was building a pit, but not building like a way out of the pit. So it was my first multiplayer map, and so of course everybody winds up in the pit, and no one can get out. So it ends just being like a blood fest in the pit. So like little things like that, you start learning about them, and you start learning about how people play games, and I mean it just takes time. That's why I was thinking, like, if you find someone in the community, like in the game game modding community that already has some experience doing that, they probably already have like a higher level sense of design.
Okay. Yeah, and it's just that. Start with the experimentation, with the learn in base for the level design. And okay, Luis, you think we finished this, right? Or
Yeah. ¿Cómo? Sorry.
necesitamos más información o qué más? No sé, Charlie, algo más.
No, Charlie. They were asking if you have some other information just to like finish it up or not.
No, I wanted to open it up as like a Q&A toward questions and the answers at the end, so I didn't have any additional like kind of closing or anything like that.
So I don't know if you have more time, Charlie, or just you wanna wrap it up here if they have more questions. I don't know.
Well, I have a kid that's screaming out in the hallway, so I should probably wrap it up.
Yeah, go ahead.
Your father.
No, not that I wouldn't want to, but I mean, we can talk again next week.
Yeah, next week
Yeah.
we have our session.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Cool.
Charlie, very, very thanks.
Thank you so much.
It's
My pleasure. Thank you guys.
for
It was
me.
great talking with you.
It's a very nice to meet you because you are a very amazing person with a lot of experience in this field.
Knowledge.
Thank you.
Knowledge.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you so much.
Hopefully I'm getting more and more knowledge. I'm certainly learning a lot about
Of
social
course.
mobile stuff.
So thanks and good day, man.
Cool. Thank you.
All right.
Talk to you
Bye.
later.
All right.
Yes.
Thanks,
Bye.
Charlie.
Gracias,
Talk to you
Luis.
soon.
Bye bye.
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 Luis.
Dale, acá estoy.
Hola.
¿Algo más, Luis?
No, pues teníamos una reunión hoy, Andrés me pidió que si la corríamos y no sé si quieren hacerla ahorita o la hacemos más. Andrés me dijo que si podemos correrla para las 4 ahorita y pues si quieren ahorita hablamos o más que todo ahora con ustedes era como para hacer otra vez como otro recuento de cómo ha pasado todo y de pronto aterrizarles algunas cosas que yo de una manera, pues no sé, una perspectiva en la que te pueda yo ayudarles a ver cosas diferentes de otro lado. Siempre
Listo.
ayuda, ver todo. Entonces no sé si quieren hacerlo, puedo hacerlo ya mismo si quieren o lo hacemos en otro momento.
En otro
Pues,
momento porque no está Andrés.
Pues Andrés no está, entonces no sé
Sí.
si nos vemos otra vez en 15 minutos, si ya ha llegado y empezamos, si no, pues sí tocaría aplazarlo porque no ha llegado.
Listo, listo, perfecto, me parece súper.
Listo, Luis, entonces sí, quedamos aquí pendientes. Pues vamos a
Listo.
colgar, pero cualquier cosa nos escribimos ahora a las 4.
Listo, vale. Yo estoy conectado por Skype. Me avisan. Ven, de una vez, yo no los tengo todos ustedes.
Agrégame el mío es Guillermo.Patrón.
L Parra Press. Ya te dieron.
Bueno. Pues
Ya te dieron. Ya te dieron cada vez que. Hoy
Ah,
estaba
es que estoy
tratando.
Andrés.
Bueno, ya te voy a buscar acá, es que estaba tratando de. Hoy tengo a María Angélica y a Andrés.
Eso, faltaría yo, por ejemplo.
Sí, listo ahí. Lo otro, si vieron mi correo, a todos ellos, si no tienen LinkedIn, abran LinkedIn, abrirlos a ellos, es una forma de investigar el perfil de ellos también. Y lo otro es que una gran ganancia de este proceso a futuro es que ustedes estén conectados con ellos ya personalmente. Entonces les doy un ejemplo,
Eso.
cuando ustedes vengan a San Francisco la próxima vez, ya no van a conocer solo a mí, sino ya pueden decirle a esa gente directamente, hey, vamos a estar allá, nos vemos, a que ustedes generen una red de una vez de ustedes.
Sí, amigos.
Sí, exacto, entonces eso es muy importante
Contactos,
y
amigos.
sí, y digamos que yo la forma en que arranqué con ellos pues fue unos como mentores y otros porque Charlie fue profesor mío en la
Ajá.
universidad y después yo le pedí que él fuera Board of Advisor de Presestar, entonces él aceptó y él tiene un porcentaje pequeño de Presestar por eso, igual que Jordan y Ray que también son socios nuestros, pero entre más gente conozca ustedes dentro del medio acá, llegarán a una persona, ya sean ellos o de pronto por ellos llegan a alguien más que puede ser mentor de ustedes oficial y ustedes dan un porcentaje pequeño, un 1 o 2% de la empresa no más.
Claro.
Y ellos les dedican a ustedes 1 o 2 horas a la semana para cosas que son muy sencillas. Y yo les doy un ejemplo, es la experiencia de ellos ayuda mucho a ver las cosas diferentes en problemas, entonces, y para contactos.
Claro.
Entonces eso es como un inicio para que ustedes empiezan a crear una red ya más internacional. Entonces, pues úsenlo
Sí.
y estén ahí como en la juega con ellos. ¿Listo?
Vale, Luis, entonces
Vale.
estamos hablando. Vamos ahora.
Listo,
Vale.
chao.
Chao.
Chao. Espera.